Okay.
Hello and welcome to Cinema Smackdown for June 23rd, 2019. My name is Michael Brody and I am joined today by Shane Simmons. How's it going today, Shane?
Yeah, well, I just ran here from a St. Jean Baptiste barbecue, so I have the meat sweats and a beer buzz. So I'm sure I'm good to go for the show.
That's nice to hear. Did you guys get started early? Good 7, 8 a.m. St. Jean Baptiste barbecue?
Not quite as bad as that, but early enough that it's like, well, this is some microbrewery stuff that has a kick to it. So
it's good to
early in the day for that.
It's good to get on the radio with a buzz, but let's just make sure you don't get too sloppy.
In the great tradition of drunken Canadian broadcasters.
Yeah, we should do a whole episode about that, because I bet there's some pretty great clips online we could play. But it wouldn't be movie-related, just Canadian content.
I don't know. I think there were some pretty hard drinkers involved in the movie Network.
Yeah, no kidding. So today, we're going to do something a little bit different. I mean, we're still going to talk movies. We're still going to give a whole bunch of recommendations.
But we're going to start with a deadly serious reading.
Yeah, we're going to talk through a particular theme. Do you want to start with the reading or tell us?
Yeah, no. I'll do the reading and we'll get to the theme as I wrap this up.
Take it away, sir.
So I'm not normally one for readings, but I'm going to give it my best shot here. Okay. A word about vampires. Yuck. Oh, I know, they're also very Euro-sexy, smooth talkers with smoldering bedroom eyes and supernatural powers of darkness and seduction. If they're not devastatingly handsome, they're boobtastic, with just the right hint of bisexual switch hitting if you happen to be into that sort of thing. As walking cadavers go, they make necrophilia quite socially acceptable, even trendy. And did I mention their glorious fashion sense? Each and every one of them seems to know exactly how to fill out a designer suit or fetishistic period bustier. They embody how we like to picture the death styles of the beautiful people. Cold, boring graves aren't for them. They're the afterlife of the party, and party they do, all night, every night. Cruising for that special someone they can gift with a love bite, and perhaps even immortality. If this is what you think vampires are like, you've never met one. I'm afraid movies, TV, and junk literature have poisoned your mind, the way these things tend to poison everything, for cheap entertainment and easy profit. I've seen my share of vampires. Real ones, and they don't live up to the hype. First off, vampires don't have fangs, or even particularly sharp teeth, but they do bite. They bite at any extremity or artery that gets within chomping distance and promises to bleed profusely. When they bite, they go at it with such gusto, they dig deep and hit bone more often than not. As a result, they all end up with a mouthful of twisted, chipped, and broken teeth, which only make for even nastier bite wounds on future victims. The blood they drink stagnates and spoils inside their immobile, non-functioning organs. They're dead after all, and the dead don't digest. Nevertheless, the old foul blood from past meals slowly gets pushed through their atrophied gastrointestinal system by the slurping and swallowing of fresh blood. Eventually it has nowhere left to go, and a blackened, oily collection of rotting plasma has to secrete all by itself, subjecting the host vampire to a routine trickle of tainted anal leakage. That's where the worst odor comes from. They may stink of the grave and smell like a corpse, but they themselves aren't actually rotting. It's their diet that rots, over the course of weeks as it slowly works its way through their mortified guts. They reek of the tar-like mucus that runs down their legs from uncontrollable sphincters, and the fumes of decay that waft out of their shattered-toothed maws every time they open their mouths to take another bite of someone. Still think vampires are sexy?
I gotta say, you make it sound like vampires are the Olestra of the demon world.
Well, I read that partly as shameless self-promotion, because this is an excerpt from my new book that just came out this week, Epitaph, which is the sequel to Necropolis, available on Amazon, for Kindle and Kindle Unlimited specifically.
In the Shane Simmons store.
Well, specifically, yes, if you look up my author page on Amazon.com, which is the only Amazon that actually has author pages, but otherwise you can get it at your local Amazon affiliate, whatever country you may be in. But this is to go to say, this is one of the first things I wrote in the new book, which I would subtitle, hey, this one has vampires in it, because vampires remain very popular, but I am sick to death of the sexy, attractive, sparkling, lovely, attractive vampires, and I long for the days of repulsive, horrible, putrid, completely distasteful vampires of old. And there aren't that many examples throughout cinema, but we're going to talk about a lot of them today.
Well, there is Bela Lugosi's career.
Well, yeah, Bela Lugosi was technically the first sexy vampire.
I know. His career gets messy.
In his 1931 days, and on stage playing Dracula before that, he was certainly of the exotic Hungarian sexy variety.
Indeed.
For
his
women
later
of that era.
Days,
you know, modern women are probably more akin to the Robert Patterson variety. I would say the sexiest of sexy vampires would still be Frank Langella in the 1979 Dracula. Mm-hmm. He stirred feelings in me that I didn't know I had. But I do have a great fondness for the Max Schreck era of vampire. He was the cinema's first vampire in Nosferatu, the F.W. Murnau German impressionistic classic, which remains to this day the very best vampire design that's ever been. To the point where it's been copied a number of times, including in the Werner Herzog 1979 remake of Nosferatu. But also it's cropped up in the TV movie adaptation of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. And of course, Shadow of the Vampire, which is an attempt to do a behind-the-scenes making-of fictional account of the original 1922 Nosferatu that posits Max Schreck was really a vampire and he wasn't acting at all. Which is believable if you've seen that performance, because he is very inhuman in that part.
Very true. So you mentioned Robert Pattinson, so are you implying that Batman is a vampire? Is that why you brought his name up?
I have it on good authority that the new Batman will sparkle. I am the knight, except when I sparkle.
Oh, geez, I hadn't really given it any thought until now, but with the progression of terrible Batman voices from movie to movie, because they do get significantly worse as they go along, I'd go with the high point being a tie between Michael Keaton, shockingly, and
as good Batman voices or bad?
Good.
Yeah.
As good Batman voices, and he's pretty much tied with.
Come on! You're missing the best one immediately. It's Adam West. Adam West is the greatest Batman voice of all time.
I do like Adam West, but that's in like a different.
And
category.
what is the animated guy's name? Tim.
No, it's Conroy.
Conroy something.
Yeah.
Something Conroy.
Yeah, and he's amazing.
Yeah, he is. That is the best.
When I read a Batman comic now, I hear his voice.
Yeah, you kind of can't.
There's pretty much a tie between him and Michael Keaton, where they're both pretty great versions of how to speak if you're trying to intimidate people. Kind of an interesting sound to it. And then we go to Val Kilmer, who didn't really get it, and then George Clooney, who ignored it completely.
As far as I'm concerned, George Clooney is the worst Batman voice.
He just speaks in his normal voice.
Yeah, but it's so goddamn smug.
He pretty much just wanders in and goes, "Hey, everybody, I'm Batman," and you're like, "Wait, what now?"
Haven't you seen my Batman credit card?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We move forward to the bizarre choices Christian Bale made and whatever it was they did to his voice, which...
He's not wearing hockey pads!
Exactly. Which is... I initially hated that voice and kind of came around to it to a degree. I like it in parts. But
honestly, how many people are going to hear Batman talk and go, Bruce Wayne? Because if you're going to recognize Batman as Bruce Wayne, it's going to be because of that gigantic mole next to his eyeball.
I know. I especially like the scene in the third Christian Bale Batman movie where I think it's with Catwoman. I don't remember who he's talking to. I think it's with Catwoman. He's talking to her and he turns around and she's gone. And to himself in the voice he goes, "Oh, that's what that feels like." Which is amazing. At any rate, we get to Ben Affleck, whose Batman voice is a computer-generated voice, which is just intolerable.
It's Batman with auto-tune.
Oh, it's awful. I got so mad at that movie just because... I get it, you don't want people to know your voice, but let's just live in a world where you can just talk.
He speaks in this modulated Batman voice, and you go, what, T-Pain?
Yeah. Let's just live in a world where we wouldn't recognize you, okay? Let's just make a pact. It's Kevin Conroy, I just remembered.
There you go. There you go.
Kevin Conroy, pretty close to the best Batman voice. And at any rate, so now we're on to Robert Pattinson, so I'm very curious to see... Really, what are they going to do with his voice? Because he can barely handle an American accent, so...
I'm hoping they do repulsive vampire Batman.
Right.
I think we've had that pretty much in the comics at some point or other.
Speaking of... there is a vampire Batman series. Blood something or other, drawn by Kelly Jones, written by Doug Meach, and it's not bad. It's not bad. It's I remember it being like, it's like a 4 graphic novel series. They're entertainingly trashy. But speaking of feral and dark vampires, what was our theme today, Shane?
Isn't that our theme?
Oh, right.
Our theme, repulsive, awful vampires, the non-sexy ones.
Exactly, non-sexy vampires is pretty much our theme today, and we've hit our theme just in time. In about a minute, we're going to do a commercial break. So, do you have a really short? We're going to talk about a few pieces of work now. But by the way, have we hit that button enough? You have a book coming out. No, you have a book that's been released.
It has been released in e-form. The paperback is pending.
And the title of the book is?
Epitaph.
It's the second book.
It is the Necromancer Thanatology Book 2.
Book 2. And a thanatology is?
Yes, it is a biography of someone from the point when they start to die.
Oh.
It's an obscure word. It's not even in many dictionaries. But I thought, I'm going to go with this because I'm terrible at marketing.
Mm-hmm. And plus you're trying to cash in on that whole Avengers Endgame money.
Yeah, sure. Any mention of Thanos, I mean, that's a Greek word for death, but Marvel sort of it's like when I wrote a story years ago about the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse and someone said to me, "Aren't those Marvel characters?" It's like, no, they're from the Bible, but Marvel kind of used them, I guess.
My favorite ever, and it's nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but it's one of my favorite movie anecdotes, is when a writer wrote a true story. He took a true story and adapted it as a screenplay, and it was about Elliot Ness chasing down a serial killer, which really did happen. He investigated a serial killer's activities throughout a few years, and this guy wrote a dramatized version of it. He brought it to a studio, and they said, "Let us put you in a room with our smartest executive." And this man took one look at the script and said, "You can't use Elliot Ness. He's a fictional character." Somebody owns him. You can't just go around willy-nilly writing other movies about the same character. And he argued with the guy that was a real person, and he kept saying, no, it's a movie character. It's like James Bond. He's a made-up character.
Yep. No, I have
their smartest.
I've had
executive.
similar rights arguments in the past with people trying to. No, this is a public domain thing. You can't copyright a uniform of a police force.
Exactly. All right. Well, we'll be back in a moment after these messages. All right. Well, we'll start up again with mention of the book, even though we just did it.
We'll just pound that shit to death.
Well, we won't have a reason to mention it for a while. So
right. Yeah.
We'll just bring it up. And you can jump into whatever list you got. You got about 8 movies there?
Yeah,
okay,
enough
so
that
we'll it's not 30 of them.
It'll inspire. I mean, I've already mentioned 4 of them right off the top, so.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I have a few that probably aren't on your list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also have some not glamorous but not grotesque vampire movies to bring up, but those will be last.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
There's just a few shout-outs of like, can you believe this is a vampire movie? I didn't mention Martin in the list, but it fits right into that list.
Well, it's certainly non-glamorous, but he's just a dude. So
I don't think anybody wants that and says, "Oh, I wish I was that guy." Here we go. We're almost back. And we're back on CJLS 1690. Our show is called Cinema Smackdown, and today we are talking about unglorious, unglamorous, and unsexy vampires.
As repulsive as possible.
Because, Shane, you have a book that's just been released on Amazon. Go to the...
It's called Epitaph by Shane Simmons. So.
Yeah.
And there are indeed really repulsive vampires in it because I cannot stand the sexy, attractive vampires.
Right,
They've been overplayed to death.
To be fair, that's a subplot in the book, or it's a plot. It's one of the main plots of the book, but it features a character. And what does your character do for a living?
The main character, the main character is a necromancer for hire. So he mostly deals with wealth recovery business when people die and people don't know where they stash their money. He communes with spirits and gets the information, but he gets wrapped up in much bigger events involving much more dangerous supernatural creatures, and this time around they include vampires.
I would kind of call him an unwilling paranormal investigator.
Yeah. It's an occult detective story is what it is.
But he never really wants to get into the nitty-gritty of the crime part. He just kind of wants to make some money and go away.
Yeah, don't we all?
There's a lot of wanting to roll up in a ball and go away in his personality. I wonder where he gets that from.
Kind of mention who that reflects.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So let's talk about some unsexy vampire movies. What's the first on your list?
First on my list that I did want to mention is 30 Days of Night. And the vampires in 30... The concept is that this is a small town in Alaska, I believe, where...
it's Barrow, Alaska.
Yeah, they're so far north that for a certain point in winter, for about 30 days, the sun sets, it goes away, and vampires decide that would make a fantastic holiday spot. So they go there, and they feast at will, and they don't have to worry about the sun coming up. And it is 30 days of people moving from location to location, trying to hold up and survive this this vampire invasion of their town.
And they are very feral. Vampires.
They are very feral, and they rip people apart really hard. Now, the hilarious thing for me about the film is that they attack, and then people relocate, and they hide, and days or even weeks go by, it's never quite certain, and then they get attacked again. Meanwhile, these vampires wear, despite them being really feral, they wear quite sharp black suits and white shirts.
They're pretty much designer clothes.
Yeah, designer clothes and like white dresses, and when they attack, blood flies everywhere. Mm-hmm. And then they subside, and then there's no attack for a while, and then when they attack again, they're back with their fresh designer clothes, like, without a spot on them. And the question is, well, what do they do between these attacks? And the answer is apparently laundry.
I think that what you have to do when you're one of those vampires, because they aren't so feral that they don't have any brains. They communicate.
No.
They have
but
plans.
they're Danny Houston is the lead vampire, and I was sold on this film from the stuff in the trailer where one of his potential victims is just like cowering, going, "Oh God!" and he just looks up and he just turns to her and says, "No God."
Whoa, another Batman crossover. At any rate, yeah, I think the first person that you turn as that kind of vampire would be a dry cleaner. I think that's...
Yeah, you kind of have to.
Yeah. Or maybe a legion of dry cleaners.
Either that or they just have an inexhaustible supply of fresh white shirts and suits.
I think that would be a good subtitle to a future sequel, 30 Days of Night, Legion of Dry Cleaners. There is actually a sequel to 30 Days of Night. It's... yeah, I've forgotten the title. But it isn't bad. It's a little bit more straight-to-video kind of style, but it features an actress named Kylie Sanchez, who is one of the leads in Perfect Getaway.
Oh, yeah.
She's the American Jedi's wife. She's an excellent actress. I'd like to see her in more stuff, but she's got a certain charisma in that movie, in the 30 Days a Night film as well.
And is that sequel any good?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not bad. So. I mean, it's like I said.
Because I'm not a fan of the first film. I was
right.
I like the feral nature of the vampires. I like that they're disgusting eaters, and I find it really funny that their clothes just keep getting magically clean.
I know. Anyway, it's, as if you need another dose of feral vampires, it's not a terrible sequel. So, what's the next thing on your list?
Another great one. It's not that they are repulsive as such, but they are so human redneck trailer trash. And that is, of course, the basically half the cast of Aliens reunited to do Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark.
Yeah,
we have
masterpiece movie.
Yeah, it is fantastic. It is one of the best modern vampire films.
It's also a violence masterpiece. There's so much gunfire in this movie.
It is. It is also one of those vampire movies that never bothers to point out to you that it's a vampire movie. I don't think the word vampire is uttered once in the entire film.
Once. That's kind of the charm.
You just know. They're when the reveal comes, it's like, they're vampires, but they never talk about being vampires. It's this: we can't go in the sun, and we drink blood, and we travel from town to town in a van that is taped up so that we can only see through a little slit in the front, so the sun doesn't come in. And boy, do we murder a lot of people.
Yeah, there's a certain southern styling to the whole movie, to the vampires.
Yeah, well, Lance Henriksen is the leader of this vampire clan. And at one point, someone asked him, so how old are you? And he went, well, let me just put it this way. I fought for the South.
Yeah.
We lost.
I especially like the fact that in that movie, the sunlight makes their flesh catch fire in a truly ghastly way.
Oh yeah. For as far as like vampires being harmed or destroyed by sunlight, it's never been more horrific than it is in this film.
Yep, that's it.
You can feel it when they fry. You feel it. You really, it even though they're mass murdering psychos, it kind of makes you feel bad for them when they suffer that level of pain and injury.
And as disturbing as this movie is, nothing is quite as disturbing as the real-life antics of its writer, Eric Red. I urge everyone in earshot to look up Eric Red, who I admire quite a bit as a writer. Not only did he write Near Dark, he also wrote The Hitcher and about 8 other pretty good movies. And
if you want Southern Fried road movies with ultra-violence, look no further than Eric Red's career.
And there's some phenomenal work in there, including a very bloody Western he made in the 90s. Lots and lots of good stuff in there, but wow, did that guy have a bad run of luck, let's say. And, there's some interesting. We covered it once on the show, but check it out on your own one of these days, people.
We could go down that rabbit hole and end up doing a whole show about the Eric Red antics that.
Exactly, but I am still a huge fan and plan to. I hope he makes more movies in the future. I'd really like to see at least one more.
All is forgiven, Eric. Come back.
He doesn't need my forgiveness. Murdering people isn't something that bothers me. It's not child molesting.
We can separate the art from the artist, no problem.
During a freak-out accident situation, I don't know. It's hard to know who to root for. Some of these stories. Anyway, he's a truly checkered past. Not quite as bad as the characters in the film, but pretty close. What's our next ghastly, unsexy vampire tale?
Well, unfortunately, this became like, oh, he's so sexy, which I hate.
Right. But initially,
in the early scenes of the film, and a couple of moments sprinkled throughout, we have Gary Oldman and Coppola's Dracula.
Mm.
And when he's old man Dracula, oh my God, is he compelling? Because he is repugnant and yet sad. And that moment where he licks the blood off of Keanu Reeves' razor is is one of the great grotesque and yet compelling horror movie scenes of the past 50 years.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie. It was thankfully made just before the onslaught of CGI. So
yeah, it has lots of great little miniature type of effects and practical stuff and just weird old school solutions for certain special effects that were thrown in, not necessarily because it was the best solution available at the time, but because obviously Coppola had a soft spot for that sort of era of filmmaking.
Well, the entire movie is a series of artistic sequences.
Yeah.
That are made a certain way, shot a certain way. I've only seen it once.
Oh, really?
I might revisit it one day, but I didn't much like it because by the time I'd seen it, I'd seen the tale of Dracula.
It does suffer from being
how Harker gets involved, how Van Helsing comes in.
It does suffer from being one of the most adapted books of all time. I say this fondly because I actually collect adaptations of Dracula.
Sure.
At this point, I've seen every major one. There's a few that technically qualify, but they are so loose with the material, and they're usually very obscure foreign films that are thinly related to the source material at all. Even the original Nosferatu changed a lot of things in an order to try to do an unauthorized adaptation of the original novel, and they didn't get away with it because Bram Stoker's widow sued the filmmakers of Nosferatu to the point where she got a court order to have all copies of the film destroyed.
That's right.
Thankfully, that never happened because it is one of the masterpieces of the silent era.
But if I remember correctly, she did manage to have the movie buried for a decade or two. Like
it kind of disappeared. It went away for a while before it. I think really until once television came along and there was this hunger for material to broadcast because there was so little of original television in the early days, starting in the late 1940s.
We don't have that problem anymore.
We certainly do not have that problem anymore. But yeah, it was interesting that by the time Nosferatu got remade by Herzog in 1979, they were openly calling the main character Dracula as opposed to Count Orlok as he is in the 22 version. Because at that point it's like, okay, fine, this is an adaptation of Dracula, don't sue us, here's your money, shut up.
All right, let's move on. What else we got?
Okay, I wanted to mention, again, this features probably one of the most beautiful vampires in all of cinema history. A couple of them, actually. But there is a plot that once your vampirism goes on too long, unless you're the master vampire, you begin to decay and decay horribly, and you need to be put away, and that is the hunger. So Catherine Deneuve, initially it is Catherine Deneuve and her partner David Bowie. David Bowie at his, youthful, angelic best, and Catherine Deneuve, being, typical Belle de Jour, beautiful, and Susan Sarandon in her prime being the next human to be seduced by her. But yeah, she is actively looking for a replacement because David Bowie is hitting that wall of vampirism that her lovers ultimately meet, where suddenly they start to age very rapidly and become shriveled, repulsive, semi-mummified, almost virtually unable to do anything, to the point where, but they won't die, so all she has left to do to them is put them away in a box somewhere and kind of forget about them.
Right.
They become mementos in her attic.
It's funny though, because just about every film you've mentioned so far has certainly had the glamorous vampire aspect. In there somewhere.
Yeah, at least though it's not the. It's all good. You're beautiful forever. It's like no. Here's the downside. Here's the moments where the ugliness of vampirism comes to the fore. I take my ugly vampires where I can get them, because there are very few films that have consistently repulsive vampires.
Right. Understood. That's it for The Hunger?
The Hunger, yeah, I would say another one that has that, again, attractive, beautiful vampires, until a specific moment, and there's a great moment in this film. This is one of your favorites, which is Fright Night. Mm-hmm. So Chris Sarandon as the vampire who moves in next door, and the kid next door to him with the single mom who's vulnerable to this the seduction techniques of this eligible young bachelor vampire that no one realizes is a vampire. He's worried that people are going to start falling into his thrall and takes measures to stop this. His girlfriend is one of the people who falls into his thrall, gets turned at some point, and there's a great reveal where he is mucking about in the vampire's basement, I believe. And he comes across his girlfriend, and there's a camera move to her between her being normal and her being really vampired out. And when it turns back to her, half her face is a giant toothy maw of angry fangs just waiting to take a bite. It is a shocking moment. I remember that in the theater back in the 80s, of people just going, "Whoa, what the hell is that?" It is a really good moment of, oh yeah, she's a cute vampire. Oh wait, no, she's not.
I have an anecdote about that, actually, but I'll get to it in a moment. First, I just want to remind our listeners you're listening to CJLO 1690. Our show is Cinema Smackdown, and today we are running down Unsexy Vampires as a tie-in to the release of a new novel that Shane has on Amazon called Epitaph, which is the second volume in the, I'll let you say it,
the Necromancer Thanatography.
It is an excellent novel. I read it about 6 months ago. I did a little copy editing on it. I expect a good credit in there.
You do indeed have one.
And we are currently talking about Unsexy Vampires, one of which was the special effects makeup on the lead female character in Fright Night in one scene where you see she has a big messy face.
Yeah, basically half her entire head turns into a mouth.
So that scene, here's what's fascinating about it. I just heard the special effects artist on a podcast talking about this, and he mentioned, this is Steve Johnson, who went on to do the effects in Ghostbusters. Oh no, I think he did Ghostbusters, then he did Fright Night, because there we go.
Yeah.
At any rate, Steve Johnson has a lot of really interesting anecdotes about movies, and one of them was the Fright Night one, where he mentioned that was a last-minute decision to do an ugly face prosthetic, which he designed in a matter of hours, slapped together. He considered the work to be terrible.
Huh.
And then he said, here's what's really important about this effect. Don't show it for long. It's really important to me that this only be on screen for a second. It'll be very effective, but it doesn't move. It's a frozen prosthetic. We can't do anything with it.
Yeah, if you observed it long, it's one of those films that I'm sure if it was released or remastered for high definition, it would do it no favors.
Exactly.
Because that's the sort of special effect. You don't want to look at it too closely until you see the seams. Although, having said that, if you want to look at it for a long time, back in the day, it was the centerfold of an issue of Fangoria. When they would show like a particularly gory image from a new movie, and that was the one. And it's like, wow, that is striking.
Well, more to the point, here's what wound up happening. He didn't like the effect. He begged them to keep it short. And then when it was over and done with, they used it as the poster. It is the face above the title on the poster. They did a version of it. So hilariously, this thing that they had only in last moment decided to stick in the film as a jump scare that they asked their special effects artist to render very, very quickly turned out to be the key element of the entire ad campaign. So very funny right there.
So it would be like having a poster of Carrie with the hand reaching out of the grave and grabbing someone.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that was a slapdash decision, but at Fright Night it was a last minute.
Yeah, well, obviously the ad men looked at it and said, that's the most effective moment in the movie, so it's going on the poster.
Right. It's hilarious when you think about it. But also in Fright Night, at the end, when we do the confrontations with the head vampire, he's pretty grotesque. They show him, when they open his coffin, he looks like a fleshy, wet mess.
Yeah, it's when they have that moment of, oh, this is what you really look like.
Right.
I wish it was more consistent in a lot of films. There are some films, we're going to talk about a couple of them now, where the repulsiveness of the vampires is consistent throughout the film. Mm-hmm. One of my particular favorites, because you can always rely upon Guillermo del Toro to just love his monsters to the point where he wants to show a lot of them at their most repulsive. When he got to do Blade 2, that is just chock full of vampires, and they're all nasty.
Yeah, they're all really ugly. Their faces split open.
Yeah,
They have like almost a stitch line on their mouths.
Yeah, they're almost like an alien organism the way they peel open to attack people.
And Guillermo was so in love with this effect and felt that it hadn't been used enough that he did an entire 5-season television series about essentially the same vampires. That's called, what is it called? It's The Strain. And it's pretty good. It's pretty good soapy trash because it's all about a disease that turns people into vampires, but it starts to affect a larger and larger portion of the population. So as each season goes by, it goes from being a carefully guarded secret to something a lot of government officials know about to, oh, now it's an epidemic, the whole world is aware that we're all being destroyed by these vampires. And there were just sequences in a television show where you see armies of these creatures just mowing down like hundreds of soldiers and civilians, episode after episode, and a staggering amount of fight scenes. And these are creatures where when their faces open like a flower, they have a giant tongue that sticks out and tries to rip you apart. And they're very repulsive looking, and that show has an awful lot of practical effects in it. When you see it, you're like, good lord. They do, I think it's 13 episode seasons, and there is so much effects work in this that it's kind of astonishing. It's also one of those shows that because they had 5 seasons, and they had some lead characters they wanted to keep around, these vampires are so infectious, that even if their tongue grazes you, you're infected. It's basically vampires by way of bugs. Mm-hmm. And those bugs get into your skin. The thing is, they're so infectious that pretty much being anywhere near them will make you one of them. And yet, there are lead characters who just miraculously survive attack after attack after attack for 5 seasons. And it gets funnier and funnier. It is pretty much a red shirt show. They introduce new people episode after episode who are immediately dispatched by the vampires. It's just so that the lead characters can roll under a table and get away. It's kind of phenomenal. But yeah, it's a good fun show, The Strain, and it really did give Del Toro a chance to just keep that creature design up for so many hours. I guess he was super proud of it. Let's build an entire franchise on this.
We should also probably mention his other vampire project very early on in his career, which was Kronos.
Which features not at all a grotesque vampire.
No, but
a kindly old man vampire.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's what can I say? It's Del Toro. It's more, and of course, it has the ubiquitous Ron Perlman which is one of those Del Toro staples. And certainly in Blade 2, he barely needed makeup, as he usually barely needs makeup to play any monster.
I love that guy.
Yeah, I do. I am very fond of him. It's weird, actually, to see him play a normal human in a movie.
Right.
Something like Drive, for example, where you go, oh, yeah, you're still scary.
No, actually, I'd say in Drive, he's borderline frail. He's
a scary-looking, though.
For Ron Perlman, he's in a weakened position in Drive. He's not that heavy in that movie. He's dominated by, wait for it, Albert Brooks.
Well, Albert Brooks...
Albert Brooks in a...
I'm secretly terrified of Albert Brooks. I think he's the boogeyman.
Especially after that film. I'm quite...
If he could take out Heisenberg, he can take out anybody.
Exactly. At any rate, Drive's a pretty good film. Just as a side note, I am midway through watching a TV show by the director, Nicholas Winding Refn. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Apologies. But
I'm sure he doesn't pronounce it right himself.
He has an Amazon TV show called Too Old to Die Young, which is 10 episodes of varying lengths, but when you add them up, it's over 13 hours. And it is a 13-hour movie. It is a slow burn, dark crime film, some of which is absolutely brilliant beyond belief, and some of it is people leaning against a wall waiting for a really long time, to the point where you say, yeah, you're good. My goodwill for this is going away. Like, slow burn doesn't begin to describe.
And this is from someone who, like me, loves slow pacing, slow burn movies.
And yet,
and TV.
There are payoffs in Too Old to Die Young that are worth it.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many scenes of mood, tone, and waiting that you do start to question whether it really is worth it. But keep that in mind. I almost feel like there's just a fan edit cut coming that's going to make this a good 4-hour movie.
Oh, you mean like that fan edit of Breaking Bad that turned it into a 2-hour movie?
That does not sound good.
That does exist, though.
That does not sound good. All right, let's get back to our unsexy vampire talk.
Yeah, another consistently unsexy vampire, although we really don't get a good look at him until the end. But, the suggestion is, yeah, he's repulsive throughout. That's just who he is. It's a film that I've known about for a while, haven't watched, had it lying around for quite a bit. It's already 22 years old, which is shocking to think that it went that unnoticed by me this long. But it is a film based on a Stephen King short story, and it's called The Night Flyer.
The Night Flyer.
You recommended this to me when I was doing a double check of, have I forgotten any of the really grotesque vampires? I was reminded of this film that I had not seen it and thinking, should I watch that before the show? You sent me a text saying, yeah, watch it before the show. Mm-hmm. So I did indeed, and it was worth every minute of it.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah,
I hear that you were pro The Night Flyer.
It is. It's a weird throwback of a film. It's a 1997 film. It feels like a 1987 film.
Oh, I'd say 1981 movie. It really feels like an early 80s trash horror movie.
It's
in a good way.
It's trash. It's almost like an extra long, extra gruesome episode of Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, I'd actually go so far as to say it's almost a good nihilistic film noir. The lead character...
Yeah, it's close. Yeah, he is
so repulsive.
He is a William Holden level of repulsive jerk.
Let's be clear about this, all right? Here's a few things I want to mention about this film up front. It is a movie directed by a man named Mark Pavier. Oh, Pavla. Pavla? Or was it Pavier? I can't remember now. It's one of the two. I think it's Pavla. At any rate,
not a long career. He had an early.
He's still
around. The weird thing is he's apparently active again now, decades later.
Yeah,
he's got something coming out. He's had something out recently. I was looking him up because I was also interested in what happened to the female lead, which is basically a bunch of nothing. But he did marry her.
She married him.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
she married him,
happened.
and her 2 film appearances, including this one, where she's the female lead opposite Miguel Ferrer. Mm-hmm. Which is, a pretty major starting point, and then she just vanished.
Right.
Got married and said, screw this Hollywood crap.
Yeah, it's Mark Pavia.
There you go. Pavia.
At any rate, the movie stars Miguel Ferrer, who was, for my money, one of the great character actors of all time.
Oh yeah, you can't help but love him, even though he he just excels at playing an unlikable prick.
He plays nothing but an unlikable prick in this film. Now, it's worth mentioning that he burst onto the scene playing the inventor of RoboCop in the RoboCop movie. He's the guy who designs him and pushes for him and then shoots up the ranks in the company because of it. But he is such a prick when in every scene he's in. He moved on from RoboCop to Twin Peaks, where he played Albert, the FBI. I think he's
one of the most abrasive
CSI
agents you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
Except with the rare I think like quite a ways in they do suggest, he secretly has a heart of gold. But oh my god, is he just abrasive, obnoxious, insufferable.
Well, yeah, he speaks in nothing but horrible, horrible phrases, and then at one point the sheriff of Twin Peaks gets so upset with him, he punches him in the face, and the next time they run into each other, the Albert character says, "I understand that you did what you had to do, but I need you to understand something about me. I, sir, am a pacifist, and I love you like a brother." And he hugs the sheriff, and you're like, what now? And then he goes right back to being a jerk, which is kind of amazing. I just really adored that character. So Miguel Ferrer, who is sadly no longer with us, he has this wonderful career. If you look through everything he's ever done, pretty much every performance, he's pretty much always playing Miguel Ferrer. Big ass jerk. But from this to I'm sorry, I was just gonna click on his name so I can get the titles right. He's in an organ stealing movie, which I quite liked from the early 90s. I don't think I'm going to be able to find it title by title. But he's in a movie where
I'm always up for a good organ stealing movie, so you let me know.
I think he's the victim of waking up in a bathtub full of ice and then just goes on a rampage to try to find the people who did this to him. I couldn't tell you what that movie is called, but I did quite like it when I saw it. But here's the thing, one of his final performances was in 2011. He made a buddy picture with Cuba Gooding Jr., where they play buddy hitmen who drive around just taking care of business. It's called Wrong Turn at Tahoe, and it is a minor masterpiece. Much like the movie we're talking about right now, which is, again...
I won't call it a masterpiece, but it is certainly justifiably this little cult movie that could. Mm-hmm. It has its fans. It was dismissed at the time. There's certainly a lot of bad ratings and bad reviews to go with it from people who didn't see what was special about this little film.
Right.
Because it does have an interesting premise in that it is about a tabloid reporter. Are we up for a break?
Yeah, we're exactly on a
Curse
break.
you, breaks!
We will come back with a little bit more on the Night Flyer after these messages. I knew you were about to do it.
I didn't. No, good to stop because I didn't want to get on a roll there, but...
We're at 2:45.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how fast this goes.
Yeah.
I really do think that we should at least try to book the extra hour for your guest if she makes it.
Yeah?
Just
in case we want to go? Yeah.
I mean, I'll at least look into it because, the odds are she won't even show up that week, but I'll double check with her, even if I have to email her.
My only hesitation on that is I only have an hour on the YouTube thing, so...
Well, what can I tell you?
Yeah.
I guess you'll have to do that thing where you throw to the radio.
Damn you, Flip!
I mean, I actually have a little video camera that's still in the box that I've never used. It's probably the same quality as this.
Comes from that era where they said, an hour, that's good enough.
We'll just do in-camera editing. Just keep pausing every time something not interesting is happening. And we're back on CGL 1690. Our show is called Cinema Smackdown, and today we're counting down the hits. And by hits, I mean the unsexy vampire movie hits. We're talking about...
Including ones that people have never heard of and didn't do well.
And we're doing this in conjunction with the release of Shane's new novel, which is called Epitaph. It's available on Amazon as of now.
Kindle and Kindle Unlimited. If you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber,
that's true.
Go right ahead. You can read it for free.
And it's the second book following...
Necropolis.
Two excellent novels worth picking up. There is a vampire subplot in the second novel, or perhaps a little more than a subplot.
No, major, yeah.
I don't want to get too deep into it. Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers,
But that means we're talking about vampires and vampire movies, and an unsexy vampire we were just talking about is in a film called The Night Flyer, which I will mention two things about the movie. Number one, you gotta love any movie where the main character's very first line of dialogue is, "Where's my goddamn dead baby?"
Yeah, that is a fantastic opening moment,
That is
I have
his
to say.
first line in the movie, because
It's like, wow, that is classic.
he's had a photograph pulled from a newspaper he works for, and he's just really upset because he worked like crazy to get that picture
Of the dead baby.
and he feels slighted that they wouldn't put it on the cover.
And to which his editor says, "Yeah, well, let's keep the dead bodies or the victims or whatever over the age of 2."
It's just amazing. The other thing I want to mention...
It is blisteringly cynical.
I did not see this movie in its initial run for one very specific reason. It had the worst looking box. The poster.
Oh yeah, the box
terrible.
is horrible looking, yeah.
And the poster is a picture of what looks like a garbage special effect vampire face.
Yeah, and it is also the vampire who specifically is not revealed.
Exactly.
To the end, because it is about this tabloid reporter who, photographs these awful things.
But I will
say...
And
he because he sees this gore through the lens of his camera, he really, really needs to see that vampire at the end. And the vampire said, "Okay, fine, you want to see me? This is what I look like." And it's...
And actually, when he finally does turn around and you see his face, I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think he looks great, and you see this amazingly weird, ugly vampire face that then moves and alters and kind of gives expression, and I was like, geez, that actually looks fantastic.
Yeah, if you grab a still of it and throw it on a video box, it looks like junk.
Yeah, but in moving and breathing and looking, it's the thing about practical effects. They have a weight.
Yeah, yeah.
At any rate, I'd give a huge recommendation to the movie Night Flyer if, this is of course, it has to be your taste. You like cynical, not politically correct movies, because this guy is a monster, the main character. The human is the much bigger monster in this than the vampire. Every word he says is full of bile. He's misogynistic. He refers to his co-employee as his female co-reporter as Jimmy Olsen, and not in a positive way. He is extremely nasty.
You keep waiting for him to be just that little bit humor or to be won over by the female lead, and nope.
No, and actually it's one of those refreshing movies that isn't a secret love story all along.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part actually is wonderful. And, yeah, it's just watching Obsession.
Yeah, he's an unlikable film noir type of character.
Yeah.
But he is still a suitable protagonist because you understand what motivates him. And that's the difference between... You can get away with having, and I wish Hollywood would realize this more often, is that your main character does not have to be likable, doesn't have to be a good person, doesn't have to win over the audience even. But if we understand him, we can get through a narrative with him.
Exactly.
And be interested in him and his journey.
Yeah, and just as a final note, this movie does have a very, very well-filmed, interesting depiction of hell near the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sort of a hallucination, but it's kind of wonderfully done, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and the overall premise, which is basically there's a vampire who has a Cessna, and he travels from little backwoods airport to little backwoods airport, and when he lands, he kills who's ever around there, and he gets back on his plane, goes to the next one.
Yeah, but he also uses a lot of hypnotism.
Yeah, he also kind of
people
seduces people and wins them over, even though he's repulsive.
Yeah.
They kind of invite him into their homes, and then the slaughter begins.
Yeah,
and he's not nice about it.
He's just a beast in a cloak, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, that was the one thing that I didn't quite get, because they do sort of establish that, oh yeah, this guy was an aviator when he was human back in probably the 30s, judging from the photos we see. And yet he walks around in some European aristocrat 18th century cloak a la Dracula. I don't quite understand his fashion choice.
I also like the fact that the vampire's name in this is Dwight Renfield.
Yeah.
Which they don't hide.
Although they also make it clear it's an alias, but yeah, they tell you why specifically.
Anyway, The Night Flyer is an excellent movie by Mark Pavia, starring Miguel Ferrer, highly recommended. Let's move on to a couple more comments. Do you have any left? I have
you throw out a few. Let's
Alright, so these are not grotesque feral vampire movies. The two films I'd like to mention right now are offshoot vampire stories. Now, I'll bring up a third movie, which is sort of it's hard not to mention movies like this without mentioning George Romero's Martin.
Right.
Which is just
not repulsive, but just so bland a human. vampire. He's not glamorous in any way. He's just a kid who is probably delusional about being a vampire.
Mm-hmm. Well, on the exact same note of delusion possibly being vampires, possibly not, I have two movies, one of which is called Vampire from 2011. It is a movie starring an actor named Kevin Zegers, and it was directed by Shunji Iwa. Now, this movie, it's worth mentioning when we say we like slow burn movies. This is a slow burn film. It is beautifully photographed. It is 2 hours long, and you will feel all 2 hours, every minute of the 2 hours. But I mean that in a positive way. It's just a slow movie. But it is about a man who is or believes himself to be a vampire, who does feast on blood, but the way he gets his blood is he contacts people who are suicidal, and then he hangs out with them, and he quietly convinces them to kill themselves, and then he drinks their blood. It is very calm, but the movie is extremely compelling, and I will say that even if you're only so-so on the movie, it has a spectacular last 5 minutes. To that point of just, oh, that was so worth it. Just, again, it's all about the photography and the very concept of we're in this guy's head. A beautifully made movie called Vampire by Shunji Iwa. American movie, by the way, even though it's got a not-so-American director who made foreign language films through his whole career, except for this one. But I would definitely watch anything by this guy just knowing how pretty it would probably be. So that's one film, literally just Vampire from 2011. It's hard to research these things or look them up when they have such a generic title. But
yeah, it's like, which version of Dracula do you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Any of the 50 films called Dracula?
There's one other movie that is a little less questionable about whether or not he's a vampire, but what kind of vampire he is what's interesting. There was a Jude Law vampire movie from 1998. So a little bit before Jude Law got super famous, he was in a movie that has two titles. It has the super bland generic title, which is Immortality, but it also has a fantastic title, the kind of thing that never makes it to the actual film, but can be found in different territories. It's called The Wisdom of Crocodiles. And in it, he plays... Well, Jude Law is a very charismatic, compelling person in general, so he's using that to seduce and murder people. But he's also a vampire who operates with a switchblade. And it's a pretty gorgeous, interesting little movie, like a cult-type film. But again, just a pretty great movie. If you go looking for it, it'll probably be called Immortality, but the real title is The Wisdom of Crocodiles, and you'll see one of Jude Law's best performances. He's just a really interesting person in this. Again, it's not a fast-moving movie, but pretty good.
See, along the lines of possibly normal people who just think they're vampires, I thought for sure you had to mention the greatest of all these, which is Vampire's Kiss.
Of course.
Of course. Nicolas Cage. I can only imagine, I was just talking about this before I came here, I can only imagine that the director's direction to Nicolas Cage was, just go for it, man. Swing for the fences.
More Cage.
Be as Nicolas Cagey as you possibly can be. And it is Nicolas Cage turned up to 15, 16, 17. Is it? He's off the charts, Nicolas Cage.
It's the most Nicolas Cage you're going to see for 35 years until he makes the movie Mandy. At which point, once again, the director said, the director who cast Nicolas Cage in this movie against his own instinct, Mandy I'm talking about, in Mandy there's a cult leader character and a normal guy character, and he wanted Nicolas Cage for the cult leader. And Nicolas Cage read the script and said, no, I want to be the normal guy and make that extra weird, which is what he did. Mm-hmm. And it is so much better a film that Nick Cage is playing the normal guy.
Yeah, well, I also recommend Vampire's Kiss just for people who think they've seen Nicolas Cage at his most Nicolas Cagey and stuff like The Wicker Man. It's like, no, you haven't. You haven't. You really need to see Vampire's Kiss.
Here's how I like to present the movie Mandy to people and let them know what they're in for. Here's a choice moment. There's a romantic scene in Mandy early on in the film where Nicolas Cage is in bed with his wife, Mandy. And we really want to get across what kind of people these are, what sort of bond they have, and what kind of a man Nicolas Cage is. So he turns to his wife and he says, honey, knock, knock. And she says, who's there? And he says, Eric Estrada. And she says, Eric Estrada who? And he says, Eric Estrada from Chips. And that's it. That's the joke. And you're like, wait, what now?
Well, admittedly, it is the greatest joke ever told.
So, at any rate, yeah, that's the logic we're working with in Nicolas Cage's performance in Mandy.
So basically seeing Nicolas Cage trying to be a normal guy is about as Nicolas Cagey as if you're going to get. Likewise, Vampire's Kiss, he's a guy who thinks he's transforming into a vampire and tries to keep up this facade of normalcy. But he's Nicolas Cage, so that is impossible.
Yeah, undeniably. There's one thing that's worth mentioning about Vampire's Kiss. If you have not seen Vampire's Kiss, there is a certain demented inconsistency to Nicolas Cage's accent in the movie, his voice. He speaks one way, and then in other scenes he speaks another way. And it wasn't until I heard a commentary track with him and the director that I finally understood what was going on. Cage said, "Oh, my character is California trash who imagines himself to be European." And so throughout the film, whenever he feels confident, he speaks in a non-specific European accent that he's putting on. And then in other scenes when he's upset or running around or just speaking honestly, he talks like a dude from California. And so,
see, how is this not the greatest thespian the world has ever known? Why the Coen brothers never want to work with that man a second time, I have no idea.
I don't know. He may have kidnapped their children for the first movie, and that might have put them off. I have no idea. Cage has said many times that he considers Raising Arizona to be his favorite of all of his movies.
It is my favorite of all his films. It's one of my favorite films, period. But Nicolas Cage vanishes in that film. Yeah, that's the thing. When I watch that film, I never see Nicolas Cage. I only see H.I. McDonough.
So we're just about out of time. I will say again that we did this episode about unsexy vampires in conjunction...
Because it was entirely self-serving.
Conjunction with the release of Shane's new novel, which is called Epitaph. It's on Amazon.com or Amazon.ca.
Or Amazon. Everything else under the sun.
That's right. This has been our rundown of unsexy vampire movies. I think we hit a few good ones. The one I really love the most and want to point out to people who have definitely never seen it is, of course, The Night Flyer, which I just...
and Near Dark, though.
Well, of course.
If you haven't seen Near Dark, get your ass out to see Near Dark.
Nobody's seen Night Flyer, and people are generally aware of
Near
Dark.
They should
but you're
be.
right. Every movie we've mentioned today, I think, has value.
Night Flyer is the most obscure of the bunch.
Exactly. That's the one reason. But keep watching those crazy Nicolas Cage movies, because, he is... Oh, I think we have a knock at the door to
it's Avon calling.
To send us off. We will be back next week with another fantastic rundown of something or other. Until then, enjoy your unsexy vampire films.
Don't invite it in. It might be a vampire.
Hey, sorry about that. I always forget.
Yeah, it's my family.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Yeah.
Skip the occasional week. I don't exactly know if it's going to be next week, but we're supposed to have a guest on in the near future, and I was wondering if we could have your hour that week. But I will double check that.